What happens when the man who was closest to the world's most beloved figure at the time of her death finally reveals the secret that he had been holding back for 20 years? To be more precise, in this video, we will tell you about the firefighter who heard Princess Diana's final words as he breaks his silence after years. So let's get right into it. It all started on August 31st, 1997, when the world froze. A black Mercedes-Benz sped through the dark streets of Paris, trying to outrun a swarm of paparazzi. In the back seat, a woman who once redefined royalty struggled as she was exhausted, hunted, and unaware that these were the final moments of her life. And among the chaos, a French firefighter, a man who had no idea who she was, held her hand and heard the final words the Princess of Wales would ever speak. His name was Xavier Gourmelon, and for over 2 decades, he stayed silent. That night, an emergency call lit up the fire station where Xavier worked. A serious crash in the Pont de l'Alma tunnel. No names, no context, just urgency. Xavier, leading a crew of 10, raced to the scene. What they found was unlike anything they'd seen before. A luxury car crumpled into a support pillar. Paparazzi everywhere, not helping, just flashing cameras like vultures. And inside the wreck, 3 unconscious people. At first glance, it looked hopeless. The driver was dead. The man next to him was also gone. In the back, a man who would later be identified as Dodi Fayed was barely breathing. But then Xavier saw something else. A woman, blonde, barely moving, but breathing. Her eyes fluttered. Her chest caved slightly, her lungs filled with blood. She struggled to breathe, but she was alive. What Xavier didn't know, what his crew at the scene didn't know, was that he was looking into the face of Princess Diana. He leaned in, gave her oxygen, stabilized her neck, and then she whispered, "Oh my God, what's happened?" Those were her words, not poetic, not dramatic, just raw confusion, pain. The words of a woman who knew something was wrong, but didn't yet know how wrong. Xavier kept her stable as she was pulled from the wreckage. Her body seemed intact. There were some cuts on her forehead and lip, a fractured right arm, and some bruises on her thighs, hands, and feet. Nothing more. She held his hand. She breathed. He thought she'd survive. He even told reporters years later, "I thought she would live." But seconds before she reached the ambulance, her heart stopped. Right there, on the pavement. And so he began CPR, chest compressions, oxygen, heart massage. He got her pulse back, got her breathing again. The ambulance rolled out with Diana inside, alive again, at least for the moment. What no one knew yet was that her real injuries weren't visible. Everyone thought that she could survive because they saw that the injury to her chest wasn't that severe. Internally, Diana was bleeding to death. A vein near her heart had been torn, an injury so rare and so hidden that even experienced medics couldn't detect it on the spot. But before any of that came to light, before the world exploded in grief, Xavier Gourmelon disappeared into silence. He never told the media what Diana said, never spoke about that night. For years, his name didn't surface. And when it finally did, the question wasn't just what he heard, it was why he stayed silent for so long. And that's where things get complicated. As part of the French fire brigade, Xavier was bound by strict rules. Emergency responders were forbidden from discussing incidents involving public figures, especially royalty. Any leak could be punished. So even though he had held her hand, seen her face, and watched her heart stop and restart in his arms, he said nothing. That silence lasted 20 years. And when he finally did speak, His words reignited everything, from old theories to global heartbreak. He revealed that Diana didn't cry. She wasn't hysterical. She was confused, calm. "My God, what's happened?" she asked. Then silence. Just a breath, a touch, a flicker of life. And it's that calmness that haunted Xavier most. She looked like she would make it. Everyone thought she would. But within hours, the Princess of Wales, the most famous woman in the world, was pronounced dead. Her injuries were invisible, but fatal. A torn pulmonary vein near her heart caused massive internal bleeding. She made it to the hospital, but her body couldn't hold on. At 4 a.m., Diana's light went out. The world didn't just lose a princess. It lost a mother, a humanitarian, a rebel in heels, and one man, a firefighter who hadn't even known her name when he pulled her from the wreck, now held the weight of that night on his soul. For 2 decades, he didn't speak of it, not out of fear, but out of respect. And when he finally broke that silence, it wasn't just about telling her last words. It was about honoring the moment, the humanity of someone who the world had turned into a myth. The world needed to know who she was in those last seconds. Before we tell you about her last words, we need to clarify one thing. Diana's story doesn't end with a crash, and it didn't begin with one either. To understand the weight of those final words, you need to know what led her to that tunnel in the first place. Why was she being chased? Why was she even in Paris? And why did she once believe she wouldn't live to see 40? The answers to those questions will shock you. Diana, before she was the most photographed woman in the world, before the headlines, the heartbreak, and that deadly crash in Paris, Diana Spencer was just a quiet girl from a noble but broken family. And maybe that's why the fairy tale got so dark so fast. Diana was born into British aristocracy, yes, but she was no princess at birth. Her parents' marriage was cold. Her mother left when she was 6, and Diana grew up feeling unwanted, always trying to please people who never really saw her. She once said, "I was the girl who always came last." Some believed that statement and that the pain never really left. Then came Prince Charles. At first, he was dating her older sister, Sarah, but somewhere along the way, his eyes wandered to the shy teenager with the gentle voice and downturned gaze. Diana was barely out of school when Charles started courting her. He was 12 years older, and according to royal biographers, he needed a bride, someone young, beautiful, and above all, obedient. Diana seemed perfect. The royal wedding on July 29th, 1981, looked like something out of a dream. St. Paul's Cathedral, a dress with a 25-foot train. Over 750 million people are watching around the world. But what most didn't see was the trembling bride who had already started sensing that something wasn't right, that the man waiting at the altar was in love with someone else. Do you know who that woman was? It was none other than Camilla Parker Bowles, the current Queen Consort. Diana knew it. She even confronted Camilla just a few years into the marriage. "I know what's going on between you and Charles," she told her. And Camilla didn't deny it, because she didn't have to. The palace wouldn't stop it, Charles wouldn't end it. And Diana, she was left to suffer in silence. What followed was a slow, painful breakdown, not just of a marriage, but of a woman. The public adored her. She had a warmth that Charles never could match. Children, the elderly, AIDS patients, lepers, Diana touched the untouchable. She turned cold, royal duty into real human compassion. But inside the palace walls, she was falling apart. She battled bulimia, depression, self-harm, and worst of all, isolation. There were 3 of us in this marriage, she would later say, so it was a bit crowded. Those words didn't come from a tabloid. They came from her. In that now iconic 1995 BBC interview, Diana broke every royal rule. She aired the palace's dirty laundry, admitted her struggles, and showed the world a level of vulnerability they weren't ready for. The monarchy was stunned. The Queen reportedly summoned Charles and Diana to decide on an immediate divorce, and in 1996, it became official. Diana was free, or so it seemed. What most people don't know is that even after the divorce, Diana's life became even more chaotic. She had no real protection anymore, no palace shield. The press became more aggressive. The men in suits stopped returning her calls, and she was still being watched by the paparazzi and maybe others. She didn't just fear the media, she feared something else. In 2003, a letter written by Diana to her former butler, Paul Burrell, came to light. In it, she wrote, "This particular phase in my life is the most dangerous. My husband is planning an accident in my car, brake failure, and serious head injury." She believed someone was planning to kill her. She feared the brakes on her car would be tampered with, that she'd die in a crash. And 2 years later, she did. Now, whether that letter was a genuine warning or just the paranoid thoughts of a woman under siege, no one can say for sure. But the fact that she felt that way speaks volumes. Diana didn't feel safe. Not in the palace, not with the media, not even on the streets of Paris. And that's where the tragedy begins to take on new meaning. She had escaped the royal family. She had walked away from wealth, power, and the most iconic title in the world. But the emotional wounds never healed. She wanted love, peace, a normal life, something she never got. Not as a child, not as a wife, and not even as a divorced woman. So what was she doing in that car on August 31st, 1997? She was chasing privacy, trying to carve out one night of peace. And yet, the very thing she was running from, the flashing cameras, the relentless pursuit, followed her right into that tunnel. Diana's final words weren't for a prince. They weren't for a palace. They weren't even dramatic. They were raw, confused, human emotions, and maybe that's the real heartbreak, that the world's most beloved woman died the way she lived, surrounded by people who claimed to love her, but only wanted a piece of her. But what about the people who loved her? What about the men in her life who tried and failed to give her the peace she craved? What about the romances that followed her divorce, and the one man she might have married? That's where we go next. To understand why Diana was really in Paris that night, you have to look at the heartbreaks that came before Dodi, and the one man she called her soulmate, who vanished just weeks before she died. After walking out of the palace with no crown and no protection, Diana wasn't looking for a throne anymore. She was looking for something simple, something the royal family never gave her, something Charles never even tried to give her: love and peace. A man who saw her as more than a symbol. And for a moment, it looked like she found that. It didn't start with Dodi. It didn't even start after the divorce. Diana's search for love began while she was still locked in that cold marriage. And it's what kept her alive, even when everything else inside her was breaking. One of the earliest names rumored on the palace walls was Barry Manicky, her former bodyguard. Diana once said she was deeply in love with him. She even believed they might have had a future together. But then suddenly, he was gone, transferred out of her service, and not long after, killed in a mysterious motorcycle crash. Some believed it was an accident. Others, including Diana, weren't so sure. She once told a friend he was bumped off. Then came James Hewitt, a cavalry officer. Their affair played out in the tabloids. Love letters, leaked phone calls, one of which launched the infamous Squidgygate scandal. After the public heard Diana call her lover Squidgy in a private call, the press tore her apart. But Diana didn't care anymore. She was past shame. She just wanted a real connection. But none of those men changed her life the way one man did. It was the infamous doctor, Hasnat Khan. He wasn't royal, he wasn't famous. He didn't want her for status or headlines. He was a Pakistani heart surgeon. They met in 1995 at a hospital when Diana was visiting a friend. From the moment she saw him, something clicked. He didn't fawn over her, didn't chase her, and that's exactly what drew her in. Diana called him Mr. Wonderful, and for nearly 2 years, they had a secret relationship. She would sneak into his apartment wearing wigs. She met his family in Pakistan. She even considered moving there, giving up her life in the UK to be with him. That's how serious it was. She wanted to marry him. But Hasnat was torn. He didn't want the press. He didn't want the circus that followed her. He wanted a quiet life. And he wasn't sure Diana could ever truly escape the spotlight. In July 1997, just weeks before her death, they broke up. And that's when Dodi Fayed entered the picture. He was the son of Egyptian billionaire Mohammed Al-Fayed. Unlike Hasnat, Dodi had a flashy past, dating models, living fast. He was even engaged to model Kelly Fisher when he met Diana. But none of that mattered when Diana boarded his family's yacht that summer. To the world, it looked like a whirlwind romance. Luxury yachts, paparazzi shots of them kissing, tabloids screaming, Diana's new love. But behind the scenes, it wasn't that simple. Some close to Diana believed she was trying to make Hasnat jealous, that the ring Dodi gave her, the one Mohammed Al-Fayed claimed was an engagement ring, was never meant for marriage. Diana reportedly told friends she would wear it on her right hand, not her left. The future Prime Minister of Pakistan, Imran Khan, who was a close friend of both Diana and Hasnat, once said she was still in love with Hasnat. And Hasnat, he regretted the breakup, but by the time he considered calling her again, it was too late. She was gone. And maybe that's the real tragedy, that the one man who made Diana feel safe, who saw her not as a royal or a tabloid queen, but as a real person, couldn't bring himself to live in her world. And the man who could give her everything except emotional peace. That's who she was with on the night she died. That August night in Paris, Diana and Dodi were trying to dodge photographers. They couldn't go to restaurants, couldn't walk freely. Even inside the Ritz Hotel, they felt watched. Dodi planned an elaborate decoy plan to sneak out the back entrance. The goal? Just get to his apartment in peace. It was never supposed to be dramatic, just a quiet night between two people who didn't want to be chased anymore. But here's the truth. No one wants to admit. Diana was still searching for someone else. Not for Dodi, not for fairy tales. She was searching for the man who had slipped through her fingers. And maybe, just maybe, that's what made her lower her guard that night. Trust a plan that wasn't safe. Ride in a car with a driver she didn't know. Let her bodyguard, Trevor Rees-Jones, ride in the front, where it was more dangerous, instead of beside her in the back. She was tired of being hunted, of being alone, of being misunderstood. And she probably thought, what's the worst that could happen? But the worst did happen. And when her car crashed in that tunnel, and her final words were whispered to a stranger, Hasnat Khan was sleeping in London, unaware that the woman he once loved had just taken her last breath. But what happened after the crash? What happened inside the ambulance, inside the hospital, inside Westminster Abbey, as millions watched her casket pass by? Let's see. It happened on August 31st, 1997, just past midnight. The streets of Paris were quiet, and then at 12:23 a.m., a black Mercedes S280 carrying Princess Diana, Dodi Fayed, driver Henry Paul, and bodyguard Trevor Rees-Jones entered the Pont de l'Alma tunnel at nearly 65 miles per hour. They were being chased by at least 10 paparazzi on motorbikes. The car swerved, lost control, and slammed into the 13th concrete pillar inside the tunnel. According to the reports, Henry Paul and Dodi Fayed died instantly. While Trevor was crushed in the front passenger seat, his face was unrecognizable, but he later survived. And in the back seat, between twisted metal and broken glass, Princess Diana was still alive, but not for long. Her body was slumped, her head bowed forward, eyes barely open. She was bleeding internally, though no one at the scene could see it. Her injuries weren't obvious, but they were catastrophic. At 12:26 a.m., emergency calls were placed. Firefighter Xavier Gourmelon and his crew were dispatched immediately. By 12:32 a.m., they arrived. The scene was chaotic. Flashbulbs lit the dark tunnel as photographers ignored the wreck and hovered around the wreckage like vultures. Xavier didn't know the woman's identity. All he saw was a blonde woman, breathing, conscious, and whispering in a barely audible voice. He leaned closer to stabilize her neck, and she looked at him. "Oh my God, what's happened?" That's what she said. There was no panic, no screaming, just confusion. As if she still didn't know the truth, that her body was breaking down from the inside, that her rib cage had been crushed, that her time was already running out. She looked almost unhurt, Xavier later recalled. Just a small cut on her shoulder, a trickle of blood on her lips. He truly thought she would survive. It took nearly 45 minutes to remove her from the car, cutting through the wreckage, finally freeing her around 1 a.m. But at 1:18 a.m., just as the medics prepared to lift her into the ambulance, Diana's heart stopped. No pulse, no breath, no movement. Xavier immediately began CPR, compressions, oxygen, heart massage. It worked, and he brought her back. For a moment, he had done the impossible, restarted the heart of the most beloved woman in the world. The ambulance departed after a full 52 minutes after the crash. That delay later became a massive controversy. What took so long, you might ask? The reason is pretty shocking. The French emergency protocol prioritized stabilizing victims at the scene before transport. Unlike other countries, their ambulances carry full emergency equipment. But it was a gamble, and some say it cost her. The ambulance moved slowly, averaging just 25 miles per hour. At 1:41 a.m., it finally arrived at the Pitié-Salpêtrière Hospital, 19 minutes after departure. By then, Diana was critical. Her blood pressure plummeted. Her breathing was shallow. The bleeding hadn't stopped. A full surgical team was waiting. At 2:06 a.m., Diana went into cardiac arrest again, right there on the operating table. Surgeons performed an emergency thoracotomy. They opened her chest. They manually massaged her heart, tried to clamp the torn vein that had been bleeding into her lungs for nearly 2 hours. She was given multiple blood transfusions, but it wasn't enough. At 4 a.m., the doctors made the call. Diana, Princess of Wales, was officially declared dead. She was 36 years old. Back at Kensington Palace, the phones rang. Prince Charles was informed just before dawn. William and Harry were sleeping at Balmoral with their grandmother. the Queen. They didn't know yet that their world had changed forever. By 5 a.m., the BBC broke the news to the public. Princess Diana has died from injuries sustained in a car crash in Paris. People flooded the gates of Buckingham Palace. Flowers piled up by the minute. Within hours, the sea of tributes stretched so far that the royal lawns disappeared under bouquets and candlelight. Mourning swept across continents. Total strangers wept as if they'd lost a sister. The people hated the Queen for staying silent at Balmoral. Why didn't she speak? Why wasn't the royal standard lowered? The country wanted answers, and they weren't getting them. On September 6, 1997, over 2.5 billion people tuned in to watch her funeral. 3 million mourners packed the streets of London. Sir Elton John performed Candle in the Wind, rewritten in her memory as Goodbye, England's Rose. He sang with tears in his eyes, and then came the most painful part of all. 2 young boys, William and Harry, walking behind their mother's coffin in silence. They weren't princes that day. They were just sons who lost their mum.